far can I walk in either direction? Or are you going to follow me? All right, I'll be like the slap chop guy. Just back and forth. All right, well, this is a presentation that hopefully will pre-answer some questions that you don't know that you had. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end to get into maybe some discussion on what it all means. So I am John Addis. I am from a company called AE right down here in Lansing. You can go to aenow.com to learn more about us. Our team is a full-service marketing and design team. So obviously that's me, but we have all web development, video production, print design, and general marketing in-house. And we find that helps sometimes our clients' budgets go a little farther than if they had to spend a lot of money on like a web company and then a video company and then a print company and so forth. So our goal is to try to have a holistic approach to all of our clients' needs. Now, in the web arena, which of course is a big part of any design and marketing firm these days, here are some of our clients. And what we found a few years back is that obviously our state of Michigan clients, our government clients, basically clients that had to have any type of state or federal funding, had to meet these new accessibility guidelines, which we call the WCAG 2.0 AA accessibility standards. That was the Snyder Directive, but of course from a federal perspective that's been the standard for a long time. And sites like this, which is like the statewide mental behavioral health training site, we realize all of these, even the online courses, have to be redesigned to meet these new federal standards. Now, in addition to government projects, of course, we do a lot of work with Michigan State University. Again, they moved to the WCAG 2.0 AA standards like 3 years ago now. A little bit in life for a 40-year-old. Well, 3 years is somehow small. So we have a wide variety of college and university or college department sites, of course, through MSU, all of which have to meet these new federal guidelines, which we'll be talking about today. So what is accessibility? Just as a guess, show of hands, how many people think that 5% of Americans have a disability? See, the fact that there's 5, 10, and 15, nobody ever says 5. All right, how about 10%? 15%? Good. No, you're all wrong. It's actually 20%. And this is a lot of different parts of disabilities that you're not really always thinking of as a disability. Even people with these disabilities don't refer to them as a disability, right? Because they include physical, visual, hearing, and so forth. And we'll talk about some of the specific disabilities that WCAG is designed to address. In general, the history of where we got to in all this, it used to be throughout all of human history that if you went to a blacksmith or a carpenter or a clothier or a jeweler, they would be making a product for you specifically. And they would take into account everything that you needed. So, if you needed gloves and you only had 4 fingers on one hand, they would make you a 4 fingers on one. They would make you a 4-fingered glove, right? And this is how it always was until the Industrial Revolution, which was about optimizing production, and you can only do that if you mass produce quantity based on what the vast majority of people would appreciate, right? So maybe there are some people who wouldn't fit comfortably in this type of chair, but if 90% of people can fit comfortably in this type of chair, then that's going to be a successful product. And the other 10%, well, they'll find something else they can do. So in that model, accessibility has always been thought of as kind of a hindrance. It limits progress in production, and a lot of times people think of it kind of as an unfunded mandate. When all businesses had to have handicap-accessible bathrooms and doors that were 36 inches wide and all of this, the business unions and lobbyists, they fought hard against this, right? Because they're like, you're telling us you're going to change the law that's going to cost me as a business owner money without giving me any of the money to actually do it? That's not fair. But of course, the laws did change, and business owners do have to meet physical accessibility standards, right, for their buildings and for the elevators and ramps and so forth. I mean, this is something that we all take for granted now, but in the 80s, businesses fought really hard against these standards. So the technological revolution is kind of in this second phase. The first phase was just like the Industrial Revolution. You have rapid mass production, making things that work for 90% of the people just fine, right? But now we're in this phase 2, this kind of like human-centered design phase where people, especially millennials, kind of expect, well, you can't tell me how to access your information. You need to find a way to get your information into my hands. And this is what led to things like responsive design for web development, right? I mean, it wasn't, back in the days, the early web, you would say like, oh, this website, you need Netscape Navigator 2.0 to view this, or you need to download this plugin to view this website and stuff. And so you're putting the onus on the person you are marketing to do something a certain way to hear your message. That is bad marketing strategy, right? You should be able to market to people in a way that reaches them where they are and doesn't make them do something to find you. And so accessibility is about not just doing it because the government's making you do it. It's about, hey, there's up to 20% of people that I'm not reaching right now. Why don't I develop my materials to reach them? Just like we did with making sure that all your websites work on your phones and tablets and watches and Alexas and whatever else is coming in the future. Accessibility shouldn't be thought of as this hindrance, but more of an opportunity to reach new people, a new market. Now, accessibility is not as black and white. There's not like as much of a technical, like, okay, now I've made this website accessible because I added this JavaScript code. It's not really like that. It's a lot more of an art and requires a lot of emotion and creativity and really putting yourselves into the position of somebody who might not be able to see your website and is only listening to it, for example. Or somebody who is older and they're not blind, but they have limited vision. And if your website doesn't allow them to increase the text size, for example, with their own tools, then they're just going to go to somebody else's website. Just like we found with the phone users. If they couldn't make a website work on their phone, they wouldn't go and boot up their computer in the other room. They would just go back and find somebody's website, probably a competitor's website, that did work on their phone. So think of accessibility that way. So even though it can't be automated, like the process of making something accessible, it has to be a lot more about the empathy behind it to understand it. It doesn't mean that it's totally impenetrable either for the average marketing professional, CMS user, and of course web developer. So let me talk briefly about what the law actually is. So 508, everyone heard of 508 standards? That's been around right? So the American with Disabilities Act, which has been perpetually amended, Section 508 basically required that all information and digital interfaces were accessible to people with disabilities, but it allowed for similar and comparable experiences, the kind of separate but equal thing that never turns out to be equal, but only separate. And what they found was, just like our users who were on the phone, when they found a website that was like a mobile version, but it was a simplified version, it wasn't responsive, it was just like, oh, I guess I'll give the mobile users this tiny little simple site which has my name and phone number and maybe my hours or whatever. Well, people on their phones, they had these incredibly powerful devices. They wanted to know what they were missing out on, right? So they would find that button that said View Desktop Version. Even though the user experience was terrible on a phone, people would look for that View Desktop version rather than accept this limited, stripped-down version of the site for mobile. What they found is that people with disabilities were almost always doing that as well. So when websites had some kind of a button that said, click here for accessible version, people who actually were using assistive technologies wouldn't click that button anyway. They would assume, sometimes very rightly, that that part of the website was probably not updated as frequently, or maybe didn't have the good information. And so people would try to go through the real website rather than go through this weird back door that people had created for those with disabilities. And it's kind of like, if back in the 80s the businesses had been like, oh, no, you, my building is accessible. You just can't go through the front door. You can go back, in the alley and back behind the kitchen and come through. Well, that's not a similar comparable experience, right? I mean, you're telling people, like, oh, you're disabled? Well, we're going to take you out this terrible way and give you this terrible experience instead. That's not okay. So W3C basically developed the WCAG standards, which we're currently on 2.0, although 2.1 is in release. And in 2008, they launched them. And this basically changed the mindset of, give the disabled people this simplified, terrible version, and change it to, no, you have to make equal experiences that everybody can use. And that's a fairly big shift in strategy when you're developing content, because there are some things that you might now simplify in a way that 10 years ago you may have made fancier, right? And we'll get into a little bit of that and how people are dealing with that, the need to still be cutting edge and yet somehow be accessible. Now, last year the law actually changed, and it used to be, of course, that accessible websites were required for anybody taking state and federal funding. But in June of last year, a federal court ruled for the first time that private company websites are also subject to the ADA. And the case in this case was the Winn-Dixie supermarket chain, which they had a website. Well, I'll just read from the actual order. The ADA does not merely require physical access to a place of accommodation. Rather, it requires that disabled individuals be provided full and equal enjoyment of the goods, services, etc., of any place of public accommodation. And then this is the key. They ruled that the services offered on this private company's website, such as online pharmacy management, the ability to access coupons and so forth, these are undoubtedly services, privileges, advantages, and accommodations. And therefore, even though they're a private company, the federal courts ruled, no, they're still subject to the ADA. In fact, the judge actually ordered not the 508 previous much easier to implement standards, but the WCAG 2.0 AA standards, which are harder, but also way more accessible across a wider range of disabilities. So if you think of 508 as easier, but allowed for separate but equal type experiences, WCAG, the easiest way to think of it as, yeah, it's stricter, but it's governed by this philosophy that everyone should be able to use everything. Everyone, no matter what their ability, should be able to use every part of your website. So you'll still see this on national sites. I mean, this is Merck, as of last week. They still have a button like, click here for the accessible version of the website. That does not meet the current federal standard. And they know that, and they're changing it. But those are the kinds of things you still see quite a bit of online. It doesn't mean that they found a way around it. It just means they haven't gotten to meeting the federal standard again, which changed just last year. So if we talk about some of these disabilities that are actually specifically covered, of course there's big ones like blindness and deafness and things that you expect. But there's also color blindness and dyslexia and seizure disorders and physical disabilities, which may mean that your person can't use a mouse. And so if you have any type of functionality on your website that requires a mouse to use, even like hovering over drop-down menus or drag and drop elements, things like that, it could be somebody who can see, they can hear, they're not using an assisted device, they're using Google Chrome like anybody else, but they're using the tab key, right? And so if they can't use a mouse, then it doesn't matter actually if your website can be used on some assisted device that they don't use. You have to be able to make sure that they can use the device on whatever they are using. And I won't go through everything about the four main components, but basically all of W3C's work here is devoted to these four principles: that the web should be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So perceivable basically means, as most of you know, providing text alternatives for non-text content, captions, other alternatives for multimedia, allowing content that can be presented in different ways, including with assistive technologies, and make it easier for other people to perceive your content, right? This is a logical thing. Okay, sure, the web needs to be perceivable. Operable. Functionality must work from a keyboard. Users must have enough time to read and use content. Don't use content that causes seizures. This should be an obvious one. People think that it's always like, oh yeah, well sure, I don't use like the blink tag on my websites anymore. But actually, sliders are the biggest problem with this. If you have a slider, especially if a slider has no pause button, no ability to slow it down, if the motion doesn't stop within 3 seconds, all of those things can cause seizures and are considered the strictest violation of the standards. And of course, make sure everything is legible, understandable, content should appear and disappear in predictable ways, and maximizing, of course, compatibility with all these tools that people are going to be using. So if you're a marketer, if you have websites that you're managing for clients or whatever, and you don't have an accessibility plan in place at least, that should be your first step. Just like a privacy policy, just like you almost all of your websites hopefully have privacy policies because it's the law in California. And if your website can be viewed in California, that means you're governed by California's laws. Basically, try to find some kind of plan that says, hey, even if you're not accessible yet, like we know, we're working on it. We have a plan that by 2019, this website will be fully WCAG 2.0 AA compliant. As long as you have that, the chances of you getting sued are dramatically decreased. Almost everyone who's lost court battles have been people who did not have any plan in place to make their content accessible. Step 2, of course, is to conduct an internal accessibility review or commission an accessibility report by a company that can make a report. Has anyone ever done that? Anyone commissioned an accessibility report?
Never even heard of this way.
Awesome. Well, no, not awesome. I mean, awesome for those of us who make accessibility reports. So how to read one of these without freaking out. These are, we have to do a lot of these, especially for our clients who are just told by either their boss or their overlying agency that your website has to be accessible. Where are we at on that? Like, right on top of that, Rose? So we have organized, like when we do our reports, we organize it into a priority scale of degree and also a scale of ease, which is basically how much it's going to cost you to fix. And the degrees are, fourth degree, harmful to user, this is a super violation, down to first degree, which is, you could be more in compliant if you made these steps, but no one's going to have a seizure or be unable to access your site without it, right? And then the scale of fixing these don't necessarily match up with these. You could have a fourth degree issue that's super easy to fix, or a first degree issue that would take 50 hours to fix. And so knowing the degree of the violation is really important, because otherwise, you don't necessarily want to spend tons of money fixing something that is technically a violation, but a violation in the way that no one is really being denied access to content. So a lot of what you're going to see in these reports is good news, right? Lots of sites are going to have all sorts of parts that are already accidentally accessible, which of course is free. But then there might be things like, well, what's this one? Like the more button should be a button tag and not an anchor element, because the way people, when they're using screen readers to access websites, they need to be able to quickly basically skim through different site hierarchy and know which things are buttons and which things are menu items and which things are links and so forth. And so if your more is just an anchor and doesn't have the button tag, then people can't tab through those. This is a little more of a barrier where your site's not programmed in a way that can tell a screen reader what they're looking at. So it can be really difficult to find the section of the site that they're interested in. And of course, fourth degree, which is the most important. Generally, the moving carousels and moving elements tends to be where you get these, the crazy, like, you need to fix this now because lawyers are constantly scouring the net looking for sites that violate the standard. And so you want to make sure that you're not giving them anything to do. Now, almost no website is fully accessible. I pulled up CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC, just the three most popular news sites. As of now, according to Wave's online accessibility tool, CNN had 26 errors, Fox News had 53 errors, MSNBC had 18 errors. And these are sites that have full-time accessibility people on staff making sure that they don't, So I say that only to point out that, if you run one of these online tests and you get a lot of errors, don't freak out just yet. Some of these errors are undoubtedly false positives. Unfortunately, the reverse is true. The automated tools sometimes don't catch things that actually are violations too. So, but as a starting point to know what to look at, that's a good way of starting it. And treating accessibility is kind of like a process, not a destination. It's just like when you talk to people about SEO or SEM. You don't tell people, like, okay, I'll do your SEO and your SEM, and then after a month of doing your SEO and SEM, you're done. And that's it. And people will just flock to your site for years to come. And that's just not how it is. And accessibility is the same way, because WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And the C, the content, that's the stuff that you are adding and your clients are adding. And every time they add something, there's a chance that they're going to make something that's not accessible. every time you've taught your client how to use their website, their WordPress or C5 or Drupal or whatever it is, you're giving them the keys to adding content. And unless they also know how to make that content accessible, the site's going to get less and less accessible over time. So the 7 things that we think are the most important to keep in mind. Number 1, the hierarchy of how your site is laid out. Having a logical site structure, using proper use of H1, H2, H3 tags and so forth. Colors, senses, and contrast is a big part of this. Making sure that everything that's there has multiple indicators. Just as an example, if you had like an alert box, and the only thing that made that alert box special is that it was red instead of gray or something, then if you can't discern red from gray or from green, then you might not see that alert box in the same way. And so you might want to have a multiple indicator, like maybe the font is also bolder, or maybe there's a double border around it or something, right? Just to convey like, hey, this is a special box. Level adherent contrast is another big one. This throws off, the design professionals hate this. I hate this, because there are all sorts of rules about the foreground color and the background color and how far apart they can be on. Right. And so you're going to find all the time that like your client's approved logos and colors and stuff don't meet this standard, and sometimes the standards don't even, like, visually to me, I can read white on a green background way easier than I can read black on a green background, but black on green passes contrast standards and white on green doesn't, even though white on green is objectively easier for us to read as sighted web users. Black on green is the only one you can do, or find some other workaround or gradient or something to make sure that it's, trying to blend the design standards with the accessibility standards is going to be probably the trickiest thing, because the easiest way to meet accessibility standards is to make the ugliest black and white website possible, and then, of course, you're not going to be able to be branding experts. Making sure that the site works through keyboard and doesn't require any mouse or any other device. Keyboard accessibility is big, and part of that is proper hierarchy. Focus visibility is the part of when you are tabbing through a site or navigating through a site, the little rectangle, whatever, that follows you around to let you know like what you're at is super important. And remembering to make that color custom so that it's not, I mean, if you happen to have like a blue backgrounded website and the default color for that little rectangle is blue, then you're not going to meet color contrast standards between your rectangle and your background. And so the person who's using a keyboard and not a mouse is still not going to know where they are or what they're currently highlighted on. Alternatives to media is a big one. Now, everyone pretty much understands captions for video is a must. This is something that has been around for a long time. The AA standard, though, also requires what's called an audio descriptive track. This throws off all of us a lot. Not even YouTube allows for an audio descriptive track as a drop-down, even though that's what the standard is. So audio descriptive tracks, basically, if you've ever listened to one of these, you can, all Netflix shows, because Netflix lost a lawsuit, all Netflix shows have audio descriptive tracks now, all the new ones. Basically, there will be a narrator that narrates kind of on top of the action, but generally tries to go in between dialogue bits to explain what's happening, so that if you had your eyes closed, you would still get everything that's going on in the story. And basically, they're actually kind of fun, because you can listen to Netflix in the car, and it becomes just like a really engaging audiobook, right? With huge explosions and, A-list actors, and it's kind of fun. And they've been doing this for a long time, but only now because of the AA, this is becoming more important. My first one I listened to is in the 90s, I guess. There was a DVD, I bought the DVD for Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and it was the first time I'd seen audio descriptive track as an option. I was getting into audiobooks at the time, and I turned that into an MP3. I listened to it in car trips, multiple times, because hearing that narrator, so, and he walks through the fire, gun over his shoulder, and then it's exciting. All right, so controls, another one. Obviously, some of these are overlapping each other, but proper label, making sure that there's indications to where you are, making sure that it does work not only with keyboard, but also with a mouse or a laser or whatever is coming down the pipe. and then time and motion. So having alternatives to time-based media, if it is something, especially like if you have an online course or something where you are narrating how to do X, and you're not allowing for any like text transcript, for example, of what you're talking about, something that somebody could go back to if they needed to take the information a little slower. That's considered a pretty big violation. Not everybody can perceive content at the speed that you may have developed the content. So, and sounds like this might come up with Videoland in the future. So these are the things that we generally tell people to keep an eye on, keep in their minds while they're adding content, because of course, if you're thinking about this in advance of whenever you're putting something on a website, you're way more likely to spend less time on it if you're doing it from advance than if you have to go back and remediate afterward. Because maybe you would have done something a completely different way had you thought of this in advance as opposed to trying to fix it after the fact. So in the real world here, there are some things that are pretty obvious. I mentioned the online automated checkers. They look for alt tags for images, right? An alt tag is an alternative text tag that describes what an image is to somebody who can't see it. Now, this is a real actual example that we see at MSU sites a lot. They'll add the alt tag of picture of a chart. So sure, you've passed the automated check, but that doesn't pass accessibility. Telling somebody who is blind that there's a picture of a chart here doesn't tell them what the chart says. It doesn't give them the information, and therefore it's a violation. So we would say, okay, the right way to do this would be to have your alternative text chart showing the trend of rising total enrollment at MSU from 2005 to 2017. You can even add a little description that only screen readers can see that links to an even more text-heavy description of this kind of thing. There's a lot of times on complex websites where you're using a lot of cool visuals and stuff. When people are tabbing through, adding a button to allow people to skip right to the content is important, because if you can imagine complex sites with lots of navigation, if you're thinking from a screen reader perspective, and we'll hear what this sounds like in just a second, if you had to tab through everything to get to the content on every single page, meaning every navigation element, every Facebook icon, if you had to tab through all that just to get to the content of every single subpage on your website, imagine what a frustrating user experience that would be. So for this one, just to point out, we recorded, Camtasia. We recorded a little visual to match what the screen reader would be hearing. So this is how 99% of people who are blind navigate websites.
Excel Network Web Content. You are currently on web content. To enter the web area, press Control, Option, Shift, down arrow. Link, skip to content. You are link, image, Spartan helmet with text, Michigan State University, banner. You search, edit text. Search button. Link, image, College of Arts and Letters. Link, Excel Network. You are link, image, home, list 7 items. Link, about Excel Network. Link, careers and internships. Link, study abroad in a way. Link, scholarships. Link, Twitter. Link, Instagram. Link, click or press enter to go to part 3 of the jobs. Link, click or press enter to go to part 4 of the job. Link, click or press enter to go to the next part of the jobs button. Link, learn more about social media support. Link, learn more about operations management internship. Link, learn more about technical writer.
So, in that last part, one of the things that you probably heard was the screen reader wasn't just reading 2, 3, 4. It wasn't just reading read more, read more, read more. If you're tabbing through in a screen reader, that doesn't tell you anything. So 3 said, click here for part 3 of the jobs, right? Read more said, read more about social science, right? So those are the kinds of things that you can add on your end to make sure that a website and the content is accessible in a way that is actually accessible, not just that would meet an online accessibility checker, right? The standard is not whether a site meets a check. We were talking to a government client just the other day who was asking, what software do you use to certify that this site and this page meets the federal standards? They wanted some software that they could run through it I would just give them a yes or no that they could take to their boss and say, yes, we're certified. And it was trying to explain that it's not really how it is. I mean, a site that meets any online checker might completely be inaccessible, and a site that fails an online checker might actually be accessible. Because again, this is, the real humans have to kind of make these decisions. So I know we want to have some time for questions, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. But let me very quickly give you some examples of things that we see right now that are not accessible. I mean, this is Walt Disney's, as of last week, this is their homepage image right now. Obviously, from a contrast standard point of view, that's not going to fly. But the navigation, which is almost invisible, which I remember the first time somebody showed me this, like, oh, yeah, but wait, where's the navigation? I didn't realize. This is a great example of a site that is actually not accessible to any of us. This is not, I mean, you have to go out of your way to make a white-on-white background here. This is a good example of, when you're tabbing through with your little focus checker, this blue and this gray don't meet contrast standards at all. Actually, with this projector, you can see it pretty well in this, in the real world. But if you have a limited vision, you're tabbing through a site, as a lot of people with limited vision do, because they can't see the little mouse cursor anyway. You wouldn't necessarily know where you were and where you were going to click next. And of course, this is Apple's accessibility page, so there's all sorts of things. Actually, there's a lot of stuff that's done really weirdly on this page. This, the workout app on Apple Watch, set a goal, then push yourself out. This whole thing, even with the two different types of font, is all an H2, which if you're setting up the hierarchy of your site, that's not good. This Domino's Pizza Tracker is a neat example of forgetting to send via JavaScript a change state to the screen reader. And so if you're on a site as a sighted user, you see that, Jim put my pizza in the oven, and, Larry is taking it out for delivery, and it lets you know how close your pizza is. But if you're on a screen reader, because they didn't program it to update whenever there's a change, they're always on 1. Crystal got your order. They never know that their pizza is actually being baked and being delivered until there's a knock at their door, and they're still in their bathroom. So this is, this is the kind of thing that it actually wouldn't be very hard to fix. But they still, as of, again, at least a few weeks ago when we captured this, still hadn't fixed it. Tabbing through this site is kind of a weird nightmare. I'll play this again. So when you're starting to tab, you go there, and then you go all the way to the right, and then you go back to here, and you never get to categories until you've tabbed through like half the content of the site. These are the kinds of things that sometimes when you're building a site, the default tab order is the order that you put the things in the site, and so that it might not reflect the actual logical tab order that somebody would be expecting to navigate on a site. And then, yeah, we already talked about even YouTube doesn't technically meet the standard because there's no way to play an alternate audio track. So you have to upload 2 videos and then link to one from the description of another, which, it's messy. So that's pretty much it for what I wanted to talk about. These are some resources I do highly recommend. Obviously, the actual guidelines are free for everyone to review. It goes into a wide variety of types of violations and ways of remediating them. So just Google Web Accessibility Initiative or WCAG. Actually, even if you just Google WCAG 2.0, it's almost certainly going to be the first link. There's online color contrast analyzers. This is another thing that you can do and that you can make sure that you are sharing with your clients, and that when they're uploading text, you can say, okay, well, what's my foreground color? What's my background color? Does it pass the AA standard? And you'll notice the large text, you actually get it can be a little tighter because large text is easier to discern, even if the background color is a little similar. There's some wonderful books, Web for Everyone and Designing for the Digital Age by Kim Goodwin. Really get into a lot of the kind of the why and the empathy about all of this and how to basically just be good stewards of information, as all web designers and developers should be. And webaim.org, that was the tool I brought up with the CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC thing, where at least as a starting point, It's certainly something you can do for free. You plug your website into webaim.org, and it'll walk you through what it sees, at least, as the core violations that your site is guilty of. Not exactly a substitute for somebody actually reviewing the content, but it's a great place to start, especially if you need to have a conversation with one of your clients or somebody that you're marketing with to say, hey, here's a report, this looks bad, what can we do to work with your web team or me or your web designer to reach the other 15 to 20% of Americans that you're not reaching right now. So pretty much that's it. I mean, the mission of the web is that the information is for everybody. It's our Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? Websites must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Accessibility will become a natural part of your workflow, and it's the right and legal thing to do. So that's pretty much it for me. Questions?
Yes.